I'm in one of my favourite spots to come bird watching in my local area, so I hope you enjoy the bird sounds in the background. 99% of the time when I'm reviewing a dotted notebook for my channel, I haven't used it yet. I carry out pretty extensive tests and do a whole bunch of research, but there's always a case where after using it for a while, I end up forming a different opinion about the notebook. Today I'm going to discuss 3 journals where I've had a major reversal of opinion after using the notebook compared to the opinion I had during my initial review. They include the 56 GSM Stálogy half-year notebook, the 160 GSM Vivid Scribbles notebook, and the 160 GSM Scribbles That Matter notebook. I'm Ruby from the Useful Journal. I do in-depth reviews of dot grid notebooks perfect for bullet journaling and any other form of journaling really, and investigate ways that my journal can help me with productivity and problem solving. I'm willing to admit when I've got something wrong. For 2 of these journals, I made a judgment call based on my initial pen test and my initial research about the notebook. That was switched up once I had used the journal for a while and could see how it coped with prolonged use and various different types of media. The 3rd journal I'm going to talk about has had a change at brand level that changes how I think about it in comparison to other similar brands. Let's start with my Stálogy half-year notebook with 56 GSM paper and 192 pages. Reviewing this journal was a bit challenging for me because I'd never used a journal with such thin paper, and I have to say I found it a little confronting. It is exceptionally different to write on 56 GSM paper than it is to write on 160 GSM paper, which is almost a card weight. I had to decide how I felt about the ghosting, and you'll see that I had a few other issues as well. Because it's a soft cover journal and it's very lightweight, and it also has a perfect style binding, naturally it has some issues with laying flat, particularly when you're at the beginning or the end of the notebook. I also found the dots too light. When you make them so light that they then don't properly serve their function, then what's the point? And I also experienced some feathering from my wetter fountain pens, for instance my TWSBI Diamond 580 ALR pen. I've been using the Stálogy as my interstitial and rapid logging notebook for a while now. I'm almost halfway through the notebook. I have come to terms with the thin paper, and I can totally understand now how someone could get very comfortable with that type of paper and actually prefer it to heavier papers. The lighter weight paper means that the notebook is very light and thin, even though it has 192 pages. And the thing I love about that is that it doesn't take up too much space in my bag. I think perhaps because the way I'm using the journal is only for writing, there's no artwork of any kind in the notebook, I'm less concerned about the aesthetics of the pages, and so I think that's why the ghosting has not ended up bothering me that much. I do still hate the light dot markings. I often find myself writing off the line or between the lines because I just can't see them. While I might not care about the overall aesthetic of the notebook, I do want my notes to be in even lines, and it does bother me a little that I can't keep them straight. Back to a positive change to my initial review, I've actually found that the notebook lies flat enough. I use a magnetic bookmark and I find the weight of that holds the page down. I often have the book open on my desk at work and I don't have problems with it closing. This means that in the end I quite like the Stálogy, and my only complaint is how light the dot markings are. It seems that I may have been converted to lightweight paper. When I first reviewed the Vivid Scribbles journal with 160 GSM paper, I said it was great. I had been using it for 4 months, and I did note in my review that the spine had creased down the middle and that was a potential weak spot, but I still said it was great. I knew that there had been bad bleed through from watercolour paints and from some wetter inks, and even then I still said the journal was worth a try. This was one of the first notebooks I ever reviewed, and I have to say I was a little more generous then than I tend to be now. I was concerned that a bad review might be bad for the brand, but I've now realised that if I'm not completely honest in my reviews and I try to cover up faults, then that's actually bad for my brand. I'm not being overly critical. I'm just giving honest feedback, and it's up to the journal brands to take that on board. I also noticed a couple of other little red flags in my review, including that there was bad page crinkle and that the owner didn't respond to emails. When I look at my Vivid Scribbles journal now, there is so much wrong with it. It was my main journal for 7 months and I filled it. There's a lot of things pasted into the journal. It got quite chunky and I don't think the spine coped too well with that use. The paper covering the spine split along the full length of the spine. The spine itself hasn't torn, but is definitely weak along the fold. You can see how when you open this journal, the spine folds in half, whereas on these journals that have a valley next to the spine stays straight and strong because the valley is taking the flex. If we look at brands with a similar spine to the Vivid Scribbles, you can see that the spine folds in the same way as the Vivid Scribbles, but I think some other brands hold together a bit better when there's a linen or a leatherette cover because that is stronger than the paper. The Vivid Scribbles journal, in my opinion, is not great, is not fine, and I don't think it's even worth a try. That brings me to my final about face. I do love Scribbles That Matter notebooks. I have 3. I have the 160 GSM journal in the iconic cover. I have 2 of those actually, and I have one Pro version with 120 GSM paper. Despite this, I do have to retract my previously shared opinion that I prefer Scribbles That Matter over the other big brands of 160 GSM notebooks, and that is Archer and Olive and Notebook Therapy. I now think there is nothing between them, really. There's a few little details, but Scribbles That Matter no longer sit in front. What has changed my mind? Well, when I reviewed the 160 GSM iconic version, Scribbles That Matter had invested in getting certification from the Forest Stewardship Council for their paper, so they had FSC certified paper, and they had also begun their journey with Amazon's climate pledge, which involved dealing with a whole bunch of things around climate emissions. The certification for both these things needs to be reviewed periodically. STM had made these big, grand steps in making themselves a more sustainable brand, which is something that most other brands of 160 GSM journals haven't done. So it, in my eyes, set them a step ahead of the other brands. Imagine my disappointment when I looked them up recently because I did a review of the 120 GSM notebook, only to discover that they have abandoned their FSC certification. They're no longer registered with the Forest Stewardship Council, and they haven't continued with their climate pledge with Amazon, and they're no longer showing Amazon's climate-friendly pledge button on their Amazon page. STM constantly do things that make me lose my trust in them, and I find that I'm less willing now to give them another chance. There's other brands of notebook I would rather support where I just don't have this constant issue with the way the brand is managed. While there aren't many other brands of notebook with FSC certified paper, I have found a brand with 100% recycled paper, so it is also FSC certified, and that is Coco and Lynn. That notebook has 150 GSM paper, so it's pretty close. And I have just done a whole 6 months in one of their notebooks, and I have to say I am pretty impressed with the paper and the notebook, which is holding together fine despite the fact that I have filled it full of photos that I've stuck in. If I was to become a wholesale seller of any brand, I have to say Coco and Lynn would probably be my first choice of notebook to sell. I will continue to review notebooks when I first buy them with my pen test and with the research I do. But I do recommend looking for whether I have a flip through video or whether I've talked about how I've used that notebook, because that will give you a bit more insight into how it's coping with regular use. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and don't worry, watch my other journal reviews because nearly all the time I get it right the first time and don't change my opinion later. See ya!